Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the path to liberty. I'm Michael Bolden from the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Monday, July 31st, 2023. And today I've got a follow-up of my episode just recently. I think it was July 19th of 2023, titled Strike the Root. And there I focused on some of the main ways that people try to stop federal power but are completely missing or ignoring the underlying root strategies that leading founders told us need to be used, and even people like Lysander Spooner, that they're essential to keep the government in check. So they're totally ignoring that. And of course, it's the title is a little tip of the hat to that great quote from Henry David Thoreau: "There are 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil to one who is striking at the root." So today I'm exploring the question, what is the root cause of the problems we face today? That is the largest government in the history of the world, and it causes problems. There's branches and tentacles everywhere. And for that, I want to kick it off with Patrick Henry from the Virginia Ratifying Convention on June 7th, 1788. He said, "Dangers are to be apprehended in whatever manner we proceed, but those of a consolidation are the most destructive." Consolidation is a term for combining all the powers, legislative, executive, and judicial, into one. Some people would say that you could have a little degree of consolidation or centralization and be okay. Others at the time said any of it was going to be completely bad. So Patrick Henry was really warning against anything that tended towards consolidation when he said that dangers of a consolidation are the most destructive. Years later, Thomas Jefferson, in a great letter to Joseph C. Cabell, put it this way. He said, "What has destroyed liberty and the rights of man in every government which has ever existed under the sun?" I mean, maybe it's a little Jeffersonian flair there. Maybe it's a little hyperbole. But he said every time that liberty is destroyed, every single one under the sun, the generalizing and concentrating all cares and powers into one body. In other words, centralization of power. Now, Patrick Henry obviously was an anti-federalist. Jefferson was kind of neither Federalist nor anti-federalist, but William Davie, over in North Carolina, was certainly a strong Federalist. And here he is in the North Carolina Ratifying Convention. He said, "So extensive a country as this can never be managed by one consolidated government." Of course, meaning as soon as you do that, you're going to destroy everyone's liberty. Samuel Adams, in a letter to Elbridge Gerry, and I've covered all of these many times on this show, but it's a message, I think, that cannot be repeated often enough. Here's Samuel Adams in a letter to Elbridge Gerry, 1789. "The people of the United States, under one consolidated government, cannot long remain free, or indeed under any kind of government but despotism." We know Benjamin Franklin, on the last day of the Philadelphia Convention, the Constitutional Convention of 1787, said that, the government was going to be well administered for a number of years. And of course, any type of government, as long as it's well administered and respects the liberties of the people, that's going to be okay. But he said it's only going to last like that for a certain amount of time, but it will end in despotism like all others before that, when basically people are just clamoring for more power. That's my version, my paraphrase of this. I think no one did a better job at the time of the founding of explaining why consolidation was bad. I think it was mostly just assumed, and the debate was whether or not the proposed Constitution would be too much consolidation, or if it was a consolidated government or not. But everyone actually agreed that consolidation was dangerous. It was evil. Of course, this came from people like Montesquieu and others. But no one explained the causes or the effects of consolidation better than the anti-federalist writer Brutus, who I've mentioned a number of times recently. His first anti-federalist essay, he said, of course, that the more centralized the state, the more centralized the government, the more that it would lead to an abuse of power, the more that it would lead to factions and infighting. And that's basically what we have today. If you think about even the most minute detail of political or legal action, always has to be a one-size-fits-all solution for anyone and everyone. Over 300 million people. And if it's one person or just a small group of people making that decision, what do you think the result's going to be? People are going to divide up into factions, into parties, and they're going to fight tooth and nail to the death over anything and everything, because one decision over here affects everyone. And that's what Brutus and so many others warned us about, but Brutus did such a good job of that. So, of course, it would lead to factions and infighting. It would lead to law eventually becoming no more than what Thomas Jefferson called later on the tyrant's will. He said standing armies, a government of force, coercion, violence, etc. And here's how he summed it up. He said, in so extensive a republic, the great officers of government would soon become above the control of the people and abuse their power to the purpose of aggrandizing themselves and oppressing them. That's in his first anti-federalist paper, explaining what happens when you have centralized power. And I think it's pretty obvious, at least on this one, he absolutely called it. We're living in that type of a state today. And even if it's not 100% consolidated, everything happens in one place, in most situations, it's very, very close to it. Here's James Madison in a letter to Thomas Jefferson. This was October of 1788. He said, where power is in the few, and he's basically taking the same type of position that Brutus was, recognizing that when a lot of power is in too few hands, people are going to be very corrupt with that power. And I should mention, of course, we live under the largest government in the history of the world. A few 100 million people are having all of their decisions dictated to them by a few hundred, maybe a few thousand if you count the deep state, but a small number of people in comparison. So we do have the power in the hands of the few. They're dictating, they're ruling over hundreds of millions of people, and in many situations, they're trying to rule over the entire globe, but that's another conversation. Here's Madison to Jefferson. Where the power is in the few, it is natural for them to sacrifice the many to their own partialities and corruptions. Human beings are flawed creatures. We tend towards corruption. And when there's a lot of power, the people who are the most corrupt or tend to the most corrupt, they get drawn to those positions of power and they use it in really nasty ways. And if that's not obvious by now, I don't know if I can help out at all. I don't know if I can help out. Anyways, George Mason had a very similar take. So we're looking Federalist, Anti-Federalist, and then the Jeffersonians kind of in between, where he said, of course, I'm neither Federalist nor Anti-Federalist. If I could go to heaven but with a party, I would not go at all. So at least he tried on that one. Here's George Mason. Is it to be supposed that one national government will suit so extensive a country, embracing so many climates and containing inhabitants so very different in manners, habits, and customs? He's recognizing what I've tried to put into words in modern times today. Basically, the only way, when you have a country with so much territory and so many different political, economic, religious, and social viewpoints all trying to live together, the only way they can live in peace is if you decentralize. And I'm going to get to that a little bit more in just a moment. But when you try to have one-size-fits-all solutions, you guarantee that people will be at each other's throats. And that, I think, is the greatest answer to the question, or the best answer to the question of, well, why is there so much infighting? Why is there so much fighting over anything and everything? It's because there is too much centralized power. That's what we should be expecting. We shouldn't be surprised at what we're living under, what we're seeing play out before our very eyes, and what we are going to see get much worse until the people reject the idea of centralized power. George Mason continued, and this is in the Virginia Ratifying Convention. It is ascertained by history. Again, students of history, they watched what played out in the founding generation. Whether you liked some of them or hated someone, it doesn't matter. They took a position where if you studied history and you had a similar situation in a similar power structure, you should expect the similar type results. Now, history does not always repeat, but it certainly rhymes. And the founding generation tried to take that approach as best as possible. People today seem to completely reject that. So whatever flaws the founders may have had, so much worse in many ways today when it comes to this type of an understanding. So Mason said, it is ascertained by history that there never was a government over a very extensive country without destroying the liberties of the people. So the more that you make decisions in a single government for a large territory, a large number of people, the more that you're going to guarantee that the people's liberty will be destroyed, even if you like how they use that power in the short run. Here's Thomas Jefferson again, August 13th, 1800. Our country is too large to have all its affairs directed by a single government. Public servants at such a distance, again, the same message, whether it's Brutus, whether it's James Madison, George Mason. Public servants at such a distance and from under the eye of their constituents will, from the circumstance of distance, be unable to administer and overlook all the details necessary for the good government of the citizen. And in our view, at least mine, the best way to do that is just to get the hell out of the way. The only thing that's good government is getting out of the way, especially in today's climate. Jefferson continued, and the same circumstance, by rendering detection impossible to their constituents, will invite the public agents to corruption, plunder, and waste. And all we have is corruption. All we have is plunder. They're ripping us off at every single turn. They're sending money to other people. They're devaluing our currency, if we can call it currency, they're devaluing that dirty government fiat paper funny money. They waste all the time. I mean, we can think of the amount of money that they used to pay, or probably still do pay, for hammers and tools and things like that. This is a total sham. Corruption, plunder, and waste is what Jefferson predicted would happen when you have too centralized of a state, and we're certainly there today. He said, and I do verily believe that if the principle were to prevail of a common law being in force in the U.S., which principle possesses the general government at once of all the powers of the state governments. In other words, if you have a general government, a federal government, it's not really a federal government at that point, it's a central government that basically has all power. If everybody runs to the federal government for anything and everything, to protect them from the states even, then over time, you're going to have so much corruption, plunder, and waste. He said, if it reduces us to a single consolidated government, it would become the most corrupt government on the face of the earth. And if we're not there, we are incredibly close, and we're going to get there at some point, again, unless things turn around. Now, I'm going to link to all this stuff. I publish a blog post for each episode about 1 to 2 hours after the live stream is done over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. I've got a ton of original source documents. I'm just giving little highlight quotes from each one of them. I've got a few articles from Mike Meharry and TJ Martinell coming up as well. And that way you're going to be able to read and learn more in context on your own time. That'll be over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. Now, while I'm here, I just want to say a quick hello to everyone out in the live chat. There's Ward Lawrence, good to see you in Deep East Texas, Senator DT in Elkhart, Indiana, Cheriton Farmer in Missouri, DJ Plain Ice, that's a great comment, Philip Truitt, Haji, Freedom Dreamer, and a few others. I apologize for anyone that I've skipped over. But again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. I will publish the blog post for this episode in a couple of hours after I'm done here this morning. Anyways, let's get back to Patrick Henry, because he continually railed on centralization of power, consolidation. And of course, most people today, they don't like hearing this kind of stuff because they think that the solution to problems created by the federal government are to go to the federal government and convince the federal government to stop doing the things that the federal government never should have been doing in the first place. Whether that's through convincing new people in office to stop doing the things that they've been handed on a silver platter, the power that they begin, or going to the courts, which are part of the federal government. And this is absolutely stupid and dangerous strategy. Patrick Henry put it this way: consolidation must end in the destruction of our liberties. That's again in the Virginia Ratifying Convention, June 9th, 1788. Mike Meharry then addresses this. And this is an article, this kind of gets to the solution a little bit as well, just the title, Resistance is Crucial to the Advancement of Liberty. In other words, relying on government to stop doing things that the government never should have been doing is only going to guarantee that government will continue doing more of the things it should never be doing. But here's how Mike puts it. If consolidation ends in the destruction of our liberties, the key to regaining liberty is unconsolidation, or to use an actual word, decentralization. Political decentralization, Mike writes, devolves and distributes political power. This promotes competition in the political marketplace, with various jurisdictions opposing and checking growing power in others. Now, a lot of people want us to think that checks and balances are all we need. Now, checks and balances, the way that we're taught in the government-run school system is, or government-approved school system, checks and balances means 3 different branches of the same entity. It's that, in and of itself, they can check each other to some degree, and we do see a little bit of that happen from time to time. But what happens when they're all kind of in it together? And in essence, I would say most of the time they really are. The judiciary is, in essence, for decades, really been little more than a rubber stamp. And even if you like a few of their opinions once in a while, they're not rulings, they're not laws, they're opinions. And let's say they get a few here and there correct. The vast majority of what the federal government does today, and again, we're talking the largest government in the history of the world, has been rubber stamped by the federal court system. These people are part of the problem. So checks and balances isn't just about getting three parts of the same entity to stop itself. It also includes the states and the people themselves. And Mike puts it this way. He said this strategy requires letting go of centralized political power. That includes resisting the temptation to try to wrest control of the overreaching consolidated government and impose liberty from on high. We don't want a libertarian dictator because, again, the power to protect, the power to do good always includes the power to do evil. As soon as you give people the power to force people to live free, someone is going to come along and see all that power and use it for the opposite. And there's going to be very few people who want that kind of power, who love freedom, that ever get there. So it's not really even going to, it doesn't even have a chance of happening in my mind. Maybe, I guess, in theory. But Mike goes on, he says, this is a difficult concept to grasp in an American political culture that operates almost exclusively through the consolidated government in Washington, D.C. People always tend to think in terms of grabbing and wielding political power. This will always fail, except unless you want to see more power. This will always fail because political power is the problem. The problem is government. The solution is not government. The solution is to get power out of the hands of government. And here from T.J. Martinell, he points out that really this type of thing, this view that you have to run to government and create more power in order to protect you against some emergency and things like that, this is nothing new. This debate has been going on for ages. Where there's a crisis, people demand more centralized power, and the end result is not very good. Here he says, a lot of people like the idea of a strong national government because they think it will yield the policy out. Oh, this is Mike Meharry again. I'm trying to keep track of this. A lot of people like the idea of a strong national government because they think it will yield the policy outcomes they desire. But they forget that the power to do good can just as easily be turned towards evil purposes. That's a much better way of me saying than what I was trying to say, which is as soon as you get them to give them the power to do something you like, someone's going to come along and get that power and use it in other ways. Mike writes that George Mason warned about this tendency during the Philadelphia Convention, saying, quote, "From the nature of man, we may be sure that those who have power in their hands will not give it up while they can retain it. On the contrary, we know they always, when they can, rather increase it." So even if you think there's going to be good people getting there, the odds of someone who gets all that power handed to them just turning it down and saying, okay, is very, very, very low. And that person isn't going to live too long anyways, because if they try to stop the deep state, I mean, we know how they play that out. And here's to T.J. Martinell pointing out that this debate has been going on right from the beginning. He said, many argue that the impetus for the 1787 Convention for the Constitution was Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts. And that was definitely a talking point from the Federalists. There was a talking point, even some of the Anti-Federalists were saying, yeah, we need more power. This rebellion in Massachusetts, we got to be able to have enough energy. They needed a more energetic government, is how they described it, to be able to take care of problems when they arose. The uprising, TJ writes, was due to an enormous number of farmers being unable to pay their debts. The fact that the Confederation was initially unable to quell the rebellion and required the state of Massachusetts to put it down caused a great deal of alarm about the weakness of the government under the Articles of Confederation. Now, Patrick Henry railed against this message, and he said, we should not be motivated by fear. We know that fear is the foundation of most governments. That's John Adams some years earlier when he was one of the good guys. But Patrick Henry said, let's not just run to do something because of fear, because when you do that, you give government more power, and in the long run, you end up with more consolidation. And consolidation, of course, as Patrick Henry said in an actual quote, must end in the destruction of our liberties. Back to T.J. Martinell. He said, however, the federal farmer, who is another one of these anti-federalists that I think did some excellent writing, not always right, but had some very prescient remarks and thoughts about how things were going to play out. I think that at some point I should probably do some podcast episodes covering his views or her views, probably his, but not sure. However, the federal farmer argued that this was an unfair charge, TJ writes. After all, America was still recovering from a long, costly war of independence. And it was that war, that he argued, which was the actual source of the economic trouble. So he's saying basically, if we are striking the root, we look to the source of the problem, we shouldn't be calling for more government. And this is the same kind of message that I'm trying to share today. And that was just a quick aside. And again, I should probably cover some federal farmer more in the future. But here's how federal farmer put it in his own words. The fact is admitted that our federal government does not possess sufficient powers to give life and vigor to the political system, and that we experience disappointments and several inconveniences. So he's acknowledging, look, they could have more power. Stuff that you want to get done, they cannot do. They're not authorized to do under the Articles of Confederation. And sometimes because of that, you're disappointed or things are a little inconvenient. He said, but we ought carefully to distinguish those which are merely the consequence of a severe and tedious war from those which arise from defects in the federal system. So if you blame too little power as the cause of the problem when it really is something else, then the solution is going to be the wrong solution. It's going to put you on the wrong track. And of course, people will always, the Hamiltonians of the world, will always find an excuse to try to expand power. That's certainly what Alexander Hamilton did. And even when he promised that there wouldn't be, he flipped the switch later on. Here's a federal farmer again. Our people are like a man just recovering from a severe fit of sickness. It was the war that disturbed the course of commerce, introduced floods of paper money, which is a government problem, the stagnation of credit, and threw many valuable men out of steady business. From these sources, our greatest evils arise. So federal farmers saying, like, look at the source of the problem and recognize that this is over now. It's going to take time to recover. And if we're just going to jump to more power, we're probably coming up with the wrong solution. We're not striking the root. Back to Mike Maharrey. The key to protecting people from government power is limiting government power, not handing the government even more power. Never forget, power always comes down to control. I see a lot of people calling for, all kinds of stuff. Basically, most time, I don't want to get into the details or into the weeds of some of this stuff right now, but basically, most of the time when people see a problem with something, they don't look to the underlying cause. And in many situations, there is a government cause to so many things. And even where there isn't, as Thomas Paine told us, that government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil. So we shouldn't be looking to it as a solution, as our first step solution. We should look at it as maybe as a short-term thing once in a while, at very best. And instead, it's the other way around for most people. Here's how Fisher Ames put it in the Massachusetts Ratifying Convention. He was a big government guy at the time, and even he was saying, too much provision cannot be made against a consolidation. Fisher Ames was one of the biggest big government guys in the Massachusetts Ratifying Convention, calling for more energetic government. But even he was saying you can't do too much to prevent consolidation of power. And here from Mike Maharrey one more time, he said the problem is that this strategy is scary. It's hard and often requires sacrifice. If we're not just going to sit around and, point fingers, maybe send a few bucks to some candidate and say they're going to fix things, or send bucks, some cash to support some lawsuit. Again, basically, most of the things that people do are going to the government to fix problems created by the government, when ultimately it's up to the people to protect and preserve their own constitution and their own liberty, whether the government happens to like it or not. And Mike points out that many felt the heavy hand of the law in the early days of the movement to nullify marijuana prohibition. Rosa Parks went to jail, and the British ultimately drug American colonists into a war, a shooting war over gun control. Eventually, that's where the shots were fired. And Mike points out that there is no easy path to liberty. As Thomas Paine wrote, those who expect to reap the blessings of freedom must, like men, undergo the fatigues of supporting it. Well, I hope you guys found this interesting. I hope it was educational. If you want to help us get this kind of message out to more people, absolutely nothing helps us roll up our sleeves every single day to reach and teach more people about the Constitution and liberty, how to defend both when government refuses to do so, which is constantly 24/7, 365. We teach people about founding principles from the American Revolution and even much further back. Nothing helps us do that work more than the financial faith and support of our members. If you got a couple of bucks of that dirty government fiat that they keep ruining, making worse and worse, throw it our way. Very few organizations, if any, can make a couple of dollars go as far as the TAC. We also have annual, lifetime, and 5-year options. It's over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/member. Members, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members if you want to get to the right place. And that's where you can join us. I'd be very grateful for any consideration you can give to that today. And while I'm here, I want to take another moment and see if there's any comments or questions that I can get back to. Big John says they're currently destroying the nation from within. Certainly. And if the people, as John Dickinson told us, are ultimately the ones who are responsible for defending their own Constitution, you only a free people, as Thomas Jefferson put it, claim their rights as derived from the laws of nature and not as a gift of their chief magistrate. So it's not liberty if it comes with a government permission slip or if it comes with government approval. Now, that doesn't mean that if government is going to approve some freedom once in a while, we're going to say, what? No, we don't want you to do that. We want them to get the hell out of the way as much as possible. But ultimately, the biggest failure, the destruction from within, is the fact that the people don't love liberty. We're surrounded by people who hate and fear liberty. I think most of the times it's fear. Of course, the government propaganda centers, what they call the education system, have taught people that when there's a problem, you have to go to government. Government is your protector. Government is your savior. Government is everything. And they teach us that the more that people are free, it's just chaos. So ultimately, if the people don't love freedom and they don't defend it as they ought, as Samuel Adams told us, we're not going to have it. So hopefully that's interesting as well. Haji says, I just scrolled past it. Support the 10th Amendment Center. Thank you so much. And I appreciate all your support for so many years. Also mentions Patrick Henry. There's Cowboy Roy Rogers. Frederick Bastiat's The Law, Haji writes, had observations that were complementary and supplementary to the wisdom of the men quoted here. And I think some of people like Bastiat and others, the French at that time, were certainly influenced by people like Thomas Paine, Thomas Jefferson, and others. And there's also Etienne de la Boétie, who said at one point, I do not ask that you put hands on the tyrant to topple him over, but only that you support him no longer. I apologize if I butchered that quote, but the message is you don't actually have to get into a battle with him. Just stop supporting him. And that's what so much of the message has been here at the TAC. We keep pushing that as well. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be armed to the teeth because we support the natural right of self-defense, but that has to be the absolute last resort. And you only want to get to that level when you're surrounded by a people who love liberty. And really, we're surrounded by socialists. We're vastly outnumbered at this point. So as Haji points out, top-heavy tyranny is over the people. And hopefully people will see this. We're doing our best to reach more and more every single day. Anyways, I hope you guys found this interesting. I hope it was educational. I hope it made you think. That's more important than anything. Again, I really appreciate being here. I hope you had an amazing weekend. I'm grateful for you spending some time with me on a Monday to kick off the week or whenever you happen to be listening or watching. And I hope to see you next time here on the Path to Liberty. Thank you so much for being here.